Hello and welcome to our season finale of the 2024 FWCD podcast series. My name is David Wick, and I am our resource conservationist here at the Sherburne Soil and Water Conservation District. And I'm absolutely thrilled to have you join us today for this special episode. Today, we will be diving into the world of private lands easements and exploring their incredible impacts on protection and restoration. We will be hearing directly from a landowner, a planner, and a staff responsible for protection. So whether you're considering an easement, a conservation enthusiast, or simply curious about how these projects worked, stay tuned. So without further ado, let's introduce you to our guests. First, we have Grayson.
Hi, everybody. I'm Grayson Smith. I'm a private lands wildlife biologist. I work for the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program, which is a program within the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And I'll just refer to my program as as partners moving forward. So essentially what the Partners program is a voluntary program that provides free technical and financial assistance to private landowners, managers, tribes, corporations, schools, and nonprofits who are interested in improving wildlife habitat on their land.
Thanks, Grayson. Next up, we have Haley.
Yeah, hi everybody. Haley Golz, and I'm actually a restoration program manager with the Minnesota Land Trust. So the Land Trust's main focus is acquiring conservation easements, and we have a whole ton of staff that does that, called protection program managers. But my focus is, once we have the easements in place, is doing restoration or enhancement or land management work on those easements. All our easements are held in perpetuity, so we have a responsibility to try to help maintain the excellent habitats on them, and that's where I come in. We do also do some work off easements, but that is one of our biggest focuses for obvious reasons. And the last thing I'll say is I'm focused mostly in the Metro and Southeast, and then we have different people stationed in different parts of the state.
Awesome. And finally, we have Renee.
Hi, I'm Renee Leone. I'm a landowner here in Sherburne County, on the family farm where I was raised, about 160 acres, and it's been in our family since the 1930s.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So let's get into some questions. This first one is for you, Renee. How did you hear about easement programs to begin with? And, what kind of got you there? How long did it take? What kinds of programs? How was it used? And take it however you want to go with it, and let's see where we end up.
Sure. I kind of learned about it maybe earlier and not the way most people would. When I was in law school, yes, I'm an attorney, recovering attorney, retired attorney. I actually took a class on natural resources and ended up writing a paper about conservation easements in Minnesota. So I knew it from the legal aspect, from that. And then throughout my career, I worked in different places, but I did actually work for the Minnesota Land Trust in the 1990s. And very quickly thought, oh, we have to do this on our own family farm. So in a way, I knew way too much, way too early, but it really helped me think through, would this work, how it would work, and all the challenges and issues that can come up within families and with land. And so it's been a process, because our easement wasn't actually signed until 2007, after my mom died. So we can talk more about that, but it's been a process. It's, I would say, not something to be entered into lightly, but if it's a good fit, it can really, really satisfy a lot of questions and problems for a family.
Okay. Now, Grayson and Haley, typically you don't work with retired lawyers or ex-lawyers or law people. How else have you guys seen people hearing about these programs?
Yeah, I can start. One thing, there's a lot of word of mouth, so it definitely, that's a big driver, is one person like Renee will do it, and then the neighbors will be like, hey, what are you doing? We're really interested in this. And then, maybe they don't do it, but maybe their friends end up doing it. It will just kind of spread naturally, quite well, actually. And I think people really appreciate hearing from someone else who's gone through the process. So it's great to have Renee here today. We also do conduct targeted outreach in certain areas where we're really looking for easements. anybody who's listening to this, we have some really helpful information on our webpage, so you can go read through a bunch of information there if that's something that interests you. And we try to make that accessible for people who stumble upon our webpage. And then, yeah, also maybe this is a good segue into Grayson. We work with a lot of different partners, and all the partners in the space just want habitat to be protected and restored. And so we really work together with whoever is the best program to fit the landowner's needs. We're just happy to see it get done. So we will do a lot of referring back and forth between the Land Trust and the Fish and Wildlife Service and other partners.
Yeah, I wonder if this is kind of a good time to kind of explain why I'm here. So my program, the Partners Program, we don't, well, at least in my geography, that I serve, the several county space that I serve, I don't work in easements. I don't put fish and wildlife easements on properties with landowners. For my program, I do what's called a 10-year agreement. And it essentially says, like, I will, if a project is selected, I will, working with the landowner and conservation partners, help restore, improve, or enhance that wildlife habitat on their property. And all we ask is that for a period of 10 years, they don't degrade it or destroy it. And so our landowner agreement is a 10-year agreement. But oftentimes we, the Partners Program, work hand in hand with Minnesota Land Trust. It's one of our biggest partners, one of our favorite partners, as well as Soil and Waters. And so they'll put a property in easement, and then they'll come to us in the Partners Program to do habitat surveys, come up with a design, working with the landowner and Minnesota Land Trust. And then we'll take it from beginning to end until that habitat is on the ground.
Awesome, thank you. So Renee, you mentioned that it took a little while to get your easement in place. You said it wasn't signed officially until 2007. When did all that kind of start? Even going all the way back to just having thoughts of doing it all the way back to your lawyer days. Can you kind of talk me through that process?
Yeah, I'll try to make it brief because at times it felt like a soap opera, but not really. When I worked at the Land Trust and I knew about easements, I always had it in the back of my mind that a conservation easement would be great for our farm for a number of reasons. Number one is it's not, I would say, in some ways, typical agricultural land where there's just, hundreds of acres of rolling, cropland with, ditches all over the place. There are some ditches, but it's kind of a mix of rolling hills and the pasture part of the property where I live now, where we built our retirement home, has a huge wetland on it. And there are some ditches along the edges of that wetland. And so it was kind of, in some ways, not really suitable for intensive agricultural use. And that, of course, meant that there was a lot of wildlife around here. And as my dad got older and, he kind of was less interested in farming and more interested in just watching wildlife. And he passed away in 2001. And at the time I was kind of, I'll admit, kind of pushing my parents to put the easement on the whole farm. And I knew they liked the idea, but I realized later they didn't want to tie the hands of the kids. I'm one of 4 siblings. And I think they felt like, well, if we wanted to do something that would be contrary to an easement restrictions, that we should have the opportunity to do that. And it didn't really kind of click in my brain that that was what was going on until after my mom died in 2006. And at that point, then my siblings and I inherited the property. So it's kind of at this point, well, it's not kind of, it's divided up between my sister, my nephew, and myself, the 160 acres. But I always felt like, this pasture land and this huge wetland, which, there's no more livestock. My brother-in-law got rid of the cattle about 6-7 years ago. And it was just kind of growing up wild, and there was a lot of thistle, and, not so great stuff on it at the same time that wildlife was obviously using it. And I knew that the conservation easement would kind of hold in place, that wild nature, if you will, that we didn't want any more development. We didn't want, it just dotted with houses and subdivisions, because there's plenty of that around here. But we really wanted it to be more of a wildlife haven. And so it ended up, I bought out one brother's interest in the property, and then my sister and her husband were still kind of using the rest of it, the cropland, for haying, which they still do. But for our parcel in particular, I really wanted to see what can we do to enhance that wildlife aspect. And so was really excited to hear that, now that we had the conservation easement in place, there were ways and partners who could help, such as Grayson and then through Haley's assistance as well, to start really enhancing the wildlife aspects that were already here. If it's not really suitable for, intensive human use, or it wasn't going to be a subdivision, what can we do to make it the best it can be?
Absolutely. So you mentioned you have the easement. Is there a particular name for the easement? Is this a lifetime easement? Is this a 10-year easement? Can you tell me a little bit more about the specifications of the easement itself?
Sure. I think all the easements the land trust does are perpetual in nature, and that is the way that the law is written in Minnesota. I know there are other types of easements, shorter term easements and so on, but as someone said, do you mean we can play God a little bit with this land? It can never be developed, and it is sort of one of the exceptions to that rule. So yeah, it is a permanent easement. We did reserve the one house site because we thought if anyone in the family wanted to build a house on this part of the property, they should be able to do that. And it's a good thing we did, because that's where I'm sitting right now, is in my retirement house on this on the edge of this property. So yeah, I think it's critical especially when there's multiple family members involved. You really have to think through, what do you want to allow, what do you not want to allow, and know that if you start restricting it further and doing restoration activities, you are preventing some of those former activities from going on. So once we start restoring this land, we really couldn't any longer use it really as pasture for livestock and so on. So these are really long-term decisions. It's not that you can't sell the property; it can be owned by anybody. But they are important decisions to make and understand before you go ahead with them. Honestly, I've never had a moment's regret at all. But I kind of had enough experience and working with other folks at the land trust. I knew kind of where I wanted to go with it. And thankfully the family members that are still here are in agreement, and they may be a little bit behind me, but I would love to see the rest of the farm kind of be restored in some respect in the future too. But that's always a possibility. So you can always get more restrictive, but not less.
Okay. And Haley, would you say this is a pretty typical kind of story about how do people get into easements, kind of some of the whys for people choosing an easement?
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty representative. I think a lot of drive towards easements is people who they care so much about their land. It's it's their history or their legacy, sort of like Renee. Her whole family is connected to it, and they want to see it well taken care of and in its best possible state. And I think a lot of people are worried about what about after I'm gone. Is it just going to be torn up and a bunch of houses and parking lots, and really not wanting to see that happen. And so looking for options to keep the land in a beautiful wild state. And there's a lot of as Renee mentioned, there's a lot of like long-term thinking involved in it about what you want to leave to the next generation and what you want the land to be like, and trying to use the tools available to you, which an easement is a good one to kind of influence that future in a positive way.
Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about the easements. Let's actually talk about the restoration that took place out there. So on the screen, we can see some before pictures. This is kind of what the site looked like. This is what you might be familiar, Renee, thinking about long-term. This is what it looked like prior to the restoration. So Grayson, can you kind of explain what happened out there? What kind of restoration and kind of the steps that you guys worked through? And then I'd love to hear Renee's thoughts and explanation as well.
Sure. Yeah. So big overview, we restored 6 wetland basins throughout Renee's property. So what we did was, once the project came to me, and I actually can't remember if Haley, you brought it to me. So Haley brought it to me and said, hey, would you want to look at one of our easements and see about restoration potential? So I got in touch with Renee, and there was another biologist who had done a little work on it, but I wanted to see the site for myself. So we scheduled a survey and surveyed the land using GPS survey equipment and various other things. Took it back, put together a restoration proposal, and then ran it by Haley and Renee. And then we moved forward. We got the permit required, contracted our heavy equipment operator to do the wetland restorations, and then manage the restoration on site. So what we ended up doing was we scraped sediment and non-native vegetation out of 4 of the basins, and then installed 6 ditch plugs where appropriate on those wetlands to restore the natural hydrology to the basins.
So before we get too far into it, what does a ditch plug look like? I know a lot of people are familiar with beaver dams as ditch plugs, but I have a feeling it looks a little bit different than that.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of is like that. I mean, it's essentially, a ditch plug by any other name. You could call it a dike or a berm. Basically, it's an earthen structure with a flat top and sloped sides going into the wetland and out of the wetland. So essentially, sometime in history, someone had dug a ditch to try to drain down a wetland. And what we're doing is just restoring that topography, that elevation, and then setting it at appropriate elevations for the water to spill over when it reaches max pool. And they can be vegetated. They could just be seeded down and vegetated with native vegetation, or they can involve like a rock spillway or something like that. Just depends on the restoration.
Okay. So once you guys got some dirt work moving, you created slight depressions that were going to hold water. What came next?
So I just want to make a note that that we didn't create the depressions. The depressions were already there, and all we did was kind of enhance them and restore them by doing the scrape and the ditch plugs. Okay. But following construction with our dirt work contractor, we seeded them down and then just waited. We just waited for them to fill up with water. And luckily I had Renee in the field there, and she'd send me photos of the wetlands as time went on, and showing me, so excitedly showing me how they're slowly filling up. And I love that, and yeah, typically in the spring when we get snow melt, except for this past winter when we didn't get much, but snow melt and spring rains, then you can go back out and monitor them and see how they're doing. And they were nice and full this spring.
They still are.
Yeah.
And with all the rain we've had this spring, we keep remarking that we've never seen so much water back here. In all the time that I've been around, I've been checking in with my brother-in-law and others in the family. Unfortunately, we don't have anyone of the next generation we can ask anymore. But yeah, the picture that you're showing right now on the left, kind of in the background, you can see that sort of cattail encrusted pond. That's my house in the far background. But I'm looking out, and it's mostly water. It's just all water there right now, and the ducks and geese and everything is really using it and appreciating it. I'm sure that the reason that was kind of ditched out on both ends in the beginning was because this was part of the pasture. My dad got tired of dragging the cattle out of the mud, rather than fence around it. He just, they dug some, probably just by hand, dug some ditches out to the larger wetlands so that, this was a pretty dry most of the year, kind of a very shallow wetland area. So yeah, it's been wonderful to see the wildlife show up. It's always hard. I would just say it's always hard in the middle of construction like this, because you just feel like everything is being decimated, and it looks awful. But at the end, they left everything very smooth, and you have to have a little vision of what it's going to be, and then you wait over the winter. It was a long wait, but yeah, it's been amazing to see what they look like now.
Yeah, so you said there was a little bit of fear during that construction time period. How long did it kind of take to get over that fear and be able to see the end goal? Was that just waiting for the winter, and then that next spring things started coming up and it looked kind of good, or was there a bit of a 1 or 2 year lag time?
No, this work was just done last August or October, excuse me, last fall.
Okay.
And honestly, because of my background and my obsession with learning everything I can about things like this going on, I had seen other sites. So I kind of knew what it was going to look like. But when that big equipment shows up and starts making tracks across the land, you're kind of going, but yeah, it's I think they only hired contractors who really know what they're doing. They clearly understood, what was going on, and what their job was. And like I said, at the end, everything is left smooth and calm. And, then you just have to wait for the vegetation to come and for the water to fill up. So that's exactly
So
what's happening.
yeah, speaking of vegetation, here are some after pictures for our YouTube viewers. It looks, were there any plug plantings, or was it all seeding? I'm seeing some erosion control blankets. I guess Grayson and Haley, can you guys talk about typical vegetation plans after the dirt work's been done?
So
Grayson,
that
you can
is,
start.
yeah, sure. That is something I left out with the restoration. So I did, following the dirt work and the scraping and the construction of ditch plugs, I did come back out to the site and install erosion fabric, which is all natural material, and also seeded any disturbed areas, upland areas, with native prairie upland seed mix. And then I also seeded the wetland areas with a native wet prairie seed mix and wetland mix. So these are early photos, so it hasn't quite completely greened up yet. That should take a little bit of time.
And I'll just add one little thing, which is Grayson also knows, but wetland seeds are remarkably resilient, so they will hang out in the soil for a super long time. So especially wetland restorations like these are fun because even without seeding, you will see plants coming back up, even if you haven't seen them in years. And so the seeding definitely helps. It's always good to have more species and more individual plants out there, but it's always remarkable to me what comes up from a wetland that's been dry for years, and all of a sudden these wet plants are popping up, and they've been just hanging out in the soil waiting for the right time.
Absolutely. So Renee, it seems like there was a lot of work done out there, from heavy equipment to erosion control to seed. Was there any cost share collaboration, between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Land Trust? Were they able to help you out? Because it seems like a lot of money was spent there creating all 6 of these wetland basins.
Well, this is what some might say, this is the icing on the cake. I feel like this was the cake, and the icing is watching it come through. But this has not cost us a dime. I think the combination of the conservation easement providing the permanent protection for the land, and the amazing resources and creative and grant writing of both Haley and Grayson, and through their program, really we just had to sign off on, we were okay with it happening. Now, every property I'm sure is going to be different, and what can be done and what there's budget for is going to vary a lot. But it seems like the work here and the potential of what it could be seemed to be very, there was just only positive reaction from Grayson and Haley and their respective organizations. So yeah, it hasn't cost us a thing, which is amazing. I'm so grateful.
And I could add a little to that, because I would say the Land Trust's restoration program, in partnership with the Partners for Fish and Wildlife, is unique. I know a lot of restoration programs do have a cost share component, and that can come into play for Land Trust easements as well. But to date, we've been looking at cost share a little differently. So we've been trying to work with landowners who have the interest and the capability to light management after the big push of the project is over. And that is, even if we try to set it up for the lightest amount of maintenance possible, that's still cost share, that's still time and effort. So the Land Trust has been really looking for partners and landowners who can provide that kind of cost share, and then in return paying for all the contractor costs up front. And yeah, I guess that's a strength of the Land Trust. We have a great team that writes grants, and we've been able to pull in pretty consistent funding. There's always more projects than you can pay for, but we have been lucky in our grant writing abilities, and just ability to give very little burden to the landowners in terms of cost. And then the Land Trust is, I guess I would say, the primary financial payer of the work, but then the Fish and Wildlife will provide tons of in kind time of Grayson's time and expertise that's invaluable. But then there's also sometimes there's little things we can't do, and Grayson will be able to bring out equipment and things. So there's also kind of that typical cost share that'll come into play when needed.
Okay. So I heard you mention lucky a handful of times while you were talking just now. From any of your guys' perspective, were there kind of some hiccups along the way, some things that might have gotten overlooked, bad weather, permits getting pushed out, anything like that for you guys?
Well, I say just on my end, being the project manager on the ground with the contractor, the only hiccup I experienced was just during construction. Can't predict Mother Nature all the time, and things happen in the field, and we have to be flexible, in real time. And so one thing that occurred during construction was finding out that suitable building material for those ditch plugs was way deeper in the soil profile than anticipated. And so that elongated the actual restoration time in the field with the contractor. But we made it work. That's where all of us being flexible is invaluable. It ended up costing a little bit more money, but that's where Minnesota Land Trust paid for the gross majority of this project. But because it went a little bit longer for my contractor, I was able to use my in-house budget and funding to pay that little extra added cost. But other than that, it went smoothly.
Here are some photos from the final stages of it. All of the wildlife's returning. Obviously, we've got enough rain and whatnot to fill the basins back up, and that's fantastic to see. So unless you guys have any other hiccups, we kind of have one last question, a fun one to end it with. Unless you have anything to add, Renee?
No, go ahead.
I should add one quick thing about the funding.
Okay.
I think it's a requirement of a lot of the funding we get, which is just to acknowledge where it's coming from. And we are really lucky in Minnesota to have the Lessard Sands Outdoor Heritage Council funding a lot of good habitat work. And so that's a primary funder of both our easements and our restoration and habitat work. And that funded this project. And obviously the Land Trust is a nonprofit, so we have other sources of funding, but that's huge for us. And just a shout out.
And in the spirit of giving shout outs, I should also shout out that to supplement my personal budget with the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Nature Conservancy also helped put some money towards this project as well on my end. So shout out to the Nature Conservancy.
Thank you, guys. And so I'm going to leave you guys with one final question. This question is, what kind of restorations are your favorite to work on? And then do you kind of have a project that sticks in your mind over your career that you kind of highlights all of your successes, and it's your favorite project you always think back Renee, I'm going to assume the one you're looking at outside your window right now is probably your favorite, so I won't make you answer this one.
Well, they're all my favorite. You know, anything I did at the land trust or through my career, the current one I was working on was always my favorite. And I know that sounds cliche, but it's really true. Anything that we can do to enhance wildlife. Just very quickly too, all these amazing photos are by Grayson, who, in addition to working on this stuff all day in, day out, you know, he tends to like ask to show up at 4 a.m. so that he can, you know, take amazing photos at sunrise on one's property. And it's like, how can you even, you know, do this? But he's an amazing photographer. So yeah.
Thanks, Renee. Speaking of shout out. For me, I think, honestly, I'm not saying this because we're all on a podcast together right now, but Renee's project is my favorite project. It was the most fun to do. It's been so exciting. I think the best part for me is the landowner, like getting to work with, and Haley too, but just our team is just so incredible, and everyone's as motivated and excited about it. And that just goes, I don't know, so far with me. And what's even more exciting is now we're kind of moving towards doing oak savanna restoration, all surrounding the wetland. So that's a second part to this restoration. So it just continues to be exciting.
Yeah, and I'll just echo that. I think a really fun part of this work is when you get a really excited team together and they have different strengths and perspectives. And this project is a perfect example of that. And just people can handle different parts of it. Renee's out there watching it every day and sending updates, and it just makes it more fun and exciting and joyous. You kind of all bring your energy together. And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the uplands, Grayson, because I'm really excited to transition to that next and surround these wetlands with some diverse prairie plantings and oak savanna. So it's exciting.
Awesome, guys. Thank you. So with that kind of wraps up our season finale of the Sherburne County podcast series. I hope you've enjoyed these conservation conversations and you learned something that you can apply to your own life. I'd also like to thank our guests today for taking the time to share their experiences and wisdom with us, and kind of also providing that firsthand look at both the challenges and the successes of conservation on private land. So with that, we're signing off for now, but remember that conservation doesn't end here. Keep nurturing nature, and together we can all make a difference. Thank you.